there might need to be a phased-in approach that on a temporary basis. Are you in principle okay with that, or would you require immediate electrification?
You think they would learn. Welcome back to Moose on Loose. My name's David. Today we've got David Eby. Vasi doesn't go easy on him, and neither do I, exposing him for his absolute hypocrisy on LNG and coal exports from Canada. Got a couple other clips here. Let's jump into this. First up, I got a clip here from America. Listen to this. This guy's saying that he's seen photos of Mexican cartels and super labs that the RCMP just don't even want to touch. They won't touch them. They just leave them alone.
You know, core fairness issues. Let's just be fair. Whatever you do to us, we'll do to you. That's what he's asking for in April, and it's not a radical idea at all.
But let me ask, because I am confused now about what you're saying about this being a drug war, not a trade war. So let's just take Canada. Mm-hmm. I mean, you said Canada's shipping fentanyl into the United States. I mean, I don't think that's happening. Sure. I mean, 1% of fentanyl is being smuggled across the border. 1%. I mean, Canada's not a major source at all of fentanyl in the United States, are they?
Well, yes, they are a major source. And I can tell you that in the Situation Room, I've seen photographs of fentanyl labs in Canada that the law enforcement folks were leaving alone. Canada's got a big drug problem.
They're leaving them alone. Photos in the Situation Room. So US has a lot of intel here, and they're acting on that. Really, I think this whole situation should have been broken into two sectors. Deal with the street fentanyl situation, the border, then deal with the unfair tariffs, such as with the dairy industry. But Donald Trump has doubled it up. That's why we have the first punitive tariffs, and then we have the secondary reciprocal tariffs. That's why this is all getting confusing. It would have probably made more sense to space this out a little bit, but really Canada needs to get a new prime minister first, a fresh mandate before any of this is done.
Even in their own cities, go walk around, Toronto and see what it's like, and you'll see that it is a big problem. And frankly, we have intelligence that Mexican cartels operate in Canada as well. And so, if you want to get the cartels out of the U.S., you got to get them out of Canada and Mexico.
Okay, but
this just supports what Sam Cooper has come out with his investigative work. Comments like this: why not leave if you hate it so much here? I don't get comments like this. Like, we want to make our country better. That's why I make these videos, is to call out this crap. I love Canada, and I want it to be what it used to be when I was a kid growing up. It was a great place to live. You didn't see crime and corruption. There was no home invasions. There wasn't rampant government corruption. As Ryan Garrettson says here, I don't hate it here. I hate what a couple of governments have done to it in such a short time. These individuals are not working in our best interests. Exactly. Next up, we've got this bumbling buffoon, David Eby. So jumping ahead in this interview here, Vasi asks him if he'd be restricting energy or putting in a tax on energy like Doug Ford is doing in Ontario. And the reason for this is because BC sends down hydro energy down to Washington, California, and Oregon. When they have peak energy needs, our energy flows to them. So we sell a lot of energy down to them, I believe around $1 billion. But we also export coal to them, to LNG. We export a lot of energy down to America.
We are passing a law, we're introducing a law in the legislature that will allow us to take measures that could impose export charges or restrict energy exports to the United States. But that is a very significant step, and we recognize that. We'll have the tool in our toolbox, but we are deeply integrated with the U.S. on energy flows, including electricity.
This guy's a climate zealot. That's ridiculous. Same thing with Doug Ford coming out saying he's going to turn off the lights. There's also a New Brunswick saying they're going to cut off the lights too, the premier there. These people are all ridiculous. What really needs to happen is Parliament needs to go back. They need to cut taxes, and then we need to have proper negotiations with the tariffs that are already in place. Canada has a bunch of very unfair tariffs on America. There's also some that America has on Canada that are not fair. This needs to be squared out, honest and clear. And this goes on both sides. Donald Trump the other day saying that Canada has tariffs on softwood lumber from America. That's not true. Same thing with Donald Trump saying that Canada is taking advantage of US with energy. That's not true. Obviously, America makes so much money off of our energy. Bring forward all the facts, get rid of all the stuff that isn't true, start negotiating real deals. But these guys, they just want to stir this up. They want this because it's good for their base. They love rallying people around Donald Trump. It gives them more power to stay in power.
We buy from them when it's cheap, and we sell to them when it's expensive. It offsets hydro rates for industrial and residential.
He just said it. We buy from them when it's cheap. So we're just going to screw over ourselves with this. Enough of this. We need to not piss off America because we can't win a trade war against America. They are 10 times the economy of us. Fact. So really, he should be cutting the carbon tax. There should be taxes cut across Canada and stop doing these dollar for dollar tariffs because America will retaliate. They'll put a tax on the oil that flows from Michigan up into Ontario that's needed for Ontario and Quebec, and they'll put a tax on the energy coming back up to us. Nobody wins, Eby.
Residential customers here in British Columbia by the tune of about $1 billion. We're there. We're absolutely going to stand with Canada. We're part of Team Canada. We're all in. We're going to fight this fight. And so for
the audacity of this man to say Team Canada when he's got an advisor that is quite literally a part of a CCP group, Chinese Communist Party, is just preposterous.
British Columbia, we're there.
Premier, I wanted to ask you also more largely about the economic impact of what's going on in British Columbia, because the budget this week did spell out sort of the forecast of what that would look like, a cumulative loss of $43 billion in GDP by the year 2029 and the potential loss of 45,000 jobs. Those kinds of figures have, I think, informed a very different conversation about getting resources to different markets. And it's against that backdrop, I want to ask you very explicitly, are you supportive of phase 2 of LNG Canada?
We're in negotiations with LNG Canada on phase 2. We are certainly supportive of the project. We brought phase 1, the largest private sector investment in BC history, forward. The critical piece we're working on with the company is mitigating the carbon impact of that. We still care very deeply about climate impacts and carbon pollution in British Columbia. I know it's not the fashion right now internationally, but climate change is real and we need to take action on it.
Look at this guy's stupid smile. Climate change is real. This guy is such a liar. This guy has no problem exporting coal to China, but then he wants to demonize Canadian companies. So while David Eby loves to virtue signal at home, and he doesn't want to shut down coal production, which gets, as you can see here, Canada's largest export to China is coal. Asia switching just 20% of its coal plants to Canadian LNG would eliminate the equivalent of Canada's total emissions. Where's David Eby on this? You'll see later in this interview, he demands that these new LNG facilities in Canada be 100% net zero by 2030. David Eby is conveniently skirting around the coal situations. Canada's coal exports up again in 2023 as governments promise ban elusive. David Eby talks a big game, but his actions are another thing. We take a look at this. This is a Wikipedia showing coal power plants in China. It goes on forever. Why is that? Because we can see this one here, coal-fired power plants in China as of January 2023. On the left here, we have provinces in China. The number on the right is the number of coal power plants, 415 plants. If you scroll down here, there's hundreds of them, not even hundreds. There's thousands, 3,092 operating coal-fired power plants in China as of January 2023, and they're building about 10 per month. All Canada has to do is provide LNG to China, and we would be net zero as a country. Not only net zero, we'd be like negative net zero 10x. I mean, we've got this Canadian coal exports up 9.6% year on year. That's right, we're increasing our coal exports to China, and then David Eby is putting a carbon tax on his own citizens here in BC. Why would we pay a tax when we're creating more pollution on the other side of the planet? This is so stupid. Oh, and I'm not done yet. We're going through and looking at the coal facilities in Canada. This one here, this is Roberts Bank Port. You can see here, this is what a coal facility looks like on the ocean. This coal gets put into a ship right here, and this ship goes all the way over to China. Where's David Eby? He's not talking about this. No, not all this pollution. And this isn't even the only port. By the way, this is the largest coal export port in North America. There's another one up here, right there. This one, this is the Neptune terminal, just outside of downtown Vancouver here. There's also another one over here, right here. This one actually does a lot of, I believe this is sulfur here. There's also another one up in Prince Rupert. Zoom in. There's another one right here. Where's David Eby? These are all in British Columbia. He doesn't want to talk about these, doesn't want to talk about China. Perhaps David Eby has some dirty financial interest or ties to China that's prevented him from talking on this. Maybe cat's got his tongue. Why isn't it that David Eby is talking about coal exports to China, but he wants to demonize Canadian businesses for trying to do business and reduce greenhouse gases? If we take a look at this one, quite literally on the government website here, this graph here shows, so look at these dark ones and these light ones. These are exports. All these ones down here are imports. So the imports are going down. The exports of coal are going up. That's why you saw that 9.6 increase year over year. Exports from Canada, major export destination, China, Japan, South Korea, India. All we have to do is replace this with LNG, and we will more than completely be net zero as a country. like 2, 3, 4, 5x times, depending on how much LNG they import. The solution here is simple for all the climate zealots across Canada, like David Eby, but somehow he doesn't want to touch this. He doesn't want to go anywhere near his beloved coal. Something is very corrupt and stinks with this guy.
Internationally, but climate change is real and we need to take action on it.
My understanding is, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, that essentially what's necessary for a new project like the second phase of LNG Canada to meet the emissions requirements is electrification. And that would be the case for Coastal GasLink that would feed into that, the phase 2 of that would phase into that as well.
So just listen to this. Now you've got the backstory of exactly what it would require Canada to be net zero. Everything he says here doesn't make any sense.
My understanding is also, though, that particularly where that pipeline is concerned, it can't be done overnight. That there might need to be a phased-in approach that, on a temporary basis, puts you above emissions requirements, but in the long run does end up meeting it. Are you, in principle, okay with that, or would you require immediate electrification?
So our clean electricity here in BC is a key part of our strategy to drive down emissions. It's not just for natural gas projects, but it's for industry as a whole, our mines, our ports, our transportation infrastructure. We have 9 major clean energy projects that are going ahead as part of the 18, more than half Indigenous owned. They're bringing on about 8% more BC hydro capacity. We're also building transmission lines through to the northwest coast, also in partnership with Indigenous people, and delivering that electricity to major projects along the line to reduce carbon pollution. This is part of our...
What about the coal getting shipped to China? Don't care about that carbon pollution? And the fact that he keeps mentioning Indigenous, there's 5.9% of the population of BC is Indigenous. Now, if it's on Indigenous lands, by all means, work with Indigenous. But he makes it a priority when most Canadians are not Indigenous. This should not be the priority. The reason he's doing is he wants to partner with Indigenous companies because then he can virtue signal about how he's some great inclusive leader. When it comes down to the Indigenous people of Canada, they should all have clean water, which Justin Trudeau has not delivered. They don't have a fair setup of basic public systems, policing, schooling, hospitals, clean water. They should all get all of that stuff. But aside from the basics, just like all of the rest of us, it should just be square and even across the board. There shouldn't be special handouts for Indigenous people, just like there shouldn't be special handouts for anyone else.
Overall strategy.
I mean, that's why I asked the question, and thank you for the information about the clean energy projects. My question, though, was more specifically about additional export capacity for LNG. And if it is going to fit into those emissions requires, it needs to be electrified. That's my understanding. Yes. But the proponents of those projects say it's not something that you can just flick a switch on, that it may have to start as partially about natural gas and then move into electrification over time. Is that something that is acceptable to you? And again, I ask against the backdrop of exactly the conversation that now everyone seems to be on the same page about after years of opposition from some people within your party. Some might even say you.
Yeah, so it is acceptable to us. We have an energy strategy for LNG that says that LNG proponents can bring on new projects, but they have to be net zero by 2030. And that might sound like a very ambitious target, but in fact...
This guy wants to hamstring our own energy projects, but he has no problem with dirty coal just getting sent over to China willy-nilly and increasing those rates year after year. Unbelievable.
We have a couple of different projects, Cedar LNG, Silism's LNG, wood fiber LNG, that are all on track to meet that target. And so we believe that we can grow the economy and protect the environment. We do have those expectations of the companies we work with, and they are meeting those expectations. So we're going to find a path forward to protect BC families, expand our economy, but also address carbon pollution.
Is there, just really quickly, is there any wiggle room on there? And I understand the climate imperative most certainly, but given the existential threat our economy is facing at the moment, is there any wiggle room on that deadline by even a few years if necessary?
We can have those conversations with companies, but we haven't had to. I'm proud and glad to know that, the Cedar LNG project, for example, will be the cleanest LNG in the world, the majority Indigenous owned LNG export project.
There it is, cleanest Indigenous owned. Dude, it's so easy to fact check this guy. Pierre Poilievre brought this up 2 years ago, saying all we had to do was replace all the dirty coal in Asia with clean LNG and we would be net zero. And they just all seem to skip over that fact.
Be proud of that as Canadians, that it'll be the lowest carbon LNG in the world, owned by Indigenous people. And that's the kind of work that we're doing here in British Columbia. We don't see that we have to sacrifice those things, and the companies we're working with agree with that. They need our support, though, to get electricity to those projects, including to major mines and other major projects like our ports. And that's what we're doing.
David Eby is a disaster of a premier. He really is. This guy has no problems with raw logs getting cut and sent over to Asia for milling, losing all those jobs here in Canada. Heck, we even have Chinese companies come over to BC and buy up our mills and buy up our land. They hire teams to dismantle the mills and then send them back over to China, and then hire some of the original workers to come and help them set it up and get the facility running. And then they import our logs to mill them in China. It is disgusting that they don't protect Canadian jobs. And if you guys have been following the channel for a long time, I don't like the clear cuts in British Columbia. I'm a big time hiker and mountaineer, etc. I do recognize that homes and many other things are built out of trees. And the only thing I've advocated is to fade the clear cuts and have them cut into shapes that make sense based on the land, the flow of the water back into the rivers, so it functions properly with nature. It doesn't change the flow of rivers. And it also looks good for tourism. And really, this is a very simple thing to do. All they have to do is cut a few extra trees in and leave a few extra trees, rows of trees out, and fade the cuts. They would look totally fine. But David Eby has instead just completely decimated the logging industry in BC and has allowed it to completely get exported to China, losing a ton of jobs here. This guy could quite possibly be one of the worst premiers in Canadian history. You haven't solved the homeless problem in BC. The rents are skyrocketing. The hospitals are over 100 years old and crowded and falling apart. Why would we put tariffs on products coming here that consumers have to buy these products and use daily? This will just increase consumer price. Exactly. David Eby's a loser. David Eby, just another green liberal. Why is BC still allowing raw log exports? It happens literally down the street from where I live here. I could go show you guys a huge stack of them right now. Maybe I'll do that in one of these episodes. They get sent directly over to China or Japan, and they get milled there and create jobs there. Meanwhile, we have mills shutting down in British Columbia at record rates. Next up, we got Yves Francois Blanchette here, says no pipelines in Quebec.
Fiercely opposed to any type of transport on Quebec territory of hydrocarbons from Western Canada to any market whatsoever. It does not serve Quebec. It does not serve the environment. It does not serve the planet. See, it's a mirage that we are always being told. The LNG zombie that was never really alive, that we reanimate as a kind of slogan.
This is such a dumb video, and he looks so stupid, especially after what I just showed you guys with all the coal exports and LNG.
The pro-hydrocarbon speech that even Mr. Harney is starting to hold as if there were a future in Western Canadian hydrocarbons. The sacrifice of interests in green energies that make Quebec rich and that are a contribution to environmental issues, which are suddenly being pushed aside from the public debate to say, we are in crisis. What a great opportunity to bypass Quebec considerations and ecological considerations to unroll a pipe to the Atlantic.
This guy's a climate zealot, and if the Quebec government doesn't participate and cooperate with the rest of Canada, the equalization payments need to be cut off. Next up, we got this one. A man in Regina's Golden Mile grocery store randomly starts doing something here. On this episode of Doctor or Engineer, that's gross, dude. Yeah, that's 30 days in jail. Put that guy in jail. The man laid down in the produce before being removed. Yuck. Wash your produce, folks. You don't want a little extra of that rocky road on your pears. Just so everyone knows, it says all the produce was discarded. This is crazy. That guy needs to be charged for whatever the cost of this is. ×5, 30 days in jail. And this is sad too, because then this does a major disservice to all of these people who actually want to come here and buy this stuff. I don't know what was here, yams or onions or whatever. There we have it. David Eby, is he acting in Canadians' best interests? Doesn't look like it. Not in my eyes. Seems like he just wants to pretend that coal exports don't happen, but he'll demonize Canadian companies that are trying to actually reduce greenhouse gases. Then that begs the question, what is really the agenda here? Is it climate change? Is it fighting back? Because if it was, then he would put in incentives for companies to build LNG facilities and displace dirty coal, but that's not what he's doing. Perhaps if we asked his CCP advisor, maybe he could give us an insight into what David Eby is doing here in Canada.